Clara Whitmore did not look back. Not once. She gripped the worn leather handle of her suitcase with both hands, her knuckles pale against the cracked strap, and she walked. The morning sun burned the back of her neck. Her boots raised small clouds of dust with every step. Behind her, Willow Creek stirred to life, doors opening, fires lighting, voices carrying across the street. Nobody called her name. Nobody came after her. She had taught their children how to read. She had written letters for their sick mothers and grieving widows. She had given this town everything she had, and they had taken it all and then destroyed what was left. If you're new here, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's begin. Clara Whitmore did not cry when she packed her suitcase. She had already used up every tear she owned somewhere between the third week of February and the cold Tuesday morning when she walked into the schoolhouse and found it empty. Not a single child, not a note, not an explanation. Just 23 small wooden chairs sitting in perfect rows, waiting for students who would never come back. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she turned around, walked the 2 blocks back to her rented room above the dry goods store, and started folding her dresses. That was 3 days ago. Now she was leaving. The road out of Willow Creek stretched north toward a pale Montana sky, flat and long and completely indifferent to the woman walking it. Clara kept her eyes forward. She knew what the town looked like at this hour. She had memorized every storefront, every broken fence post, every face that smiled at her in September and looked through her by January. She did not need to see any of it again. Her suitcase was heavier than it should have been. She had tried to leave things behind, a second pair of boots. She rarely wore a winter shawl she'd bought when she still believed she'd be staying, but in the end, she took almost everything. It felt important. Like if she left too much of herself in that town, pieces of her would stay stuck there forever, hanging in the cold air of a schoolroom that had already forgotten her name. She shifted the suitcase to her other hand and kept walking. The town's edge came and went. The last building she passed was the livery stable, and for one terrible moment she thought she heard someone call out. Her heart lurched. Her step faltered. She slowed just slightly, waiting. It was only the stable boy hollering at one of the horses. Clara exhaled and walked faster. She had 40 miles between her and the railroad station at Crestfall. 40 miles of open land, cold wind, and the kind of silence that either healed a person or finished breaking them. She had $3.40. She had half a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, a small wheel of hard cheese, and a canteen she'd filled before sunrise. She had her teaching certificates folded into the lining of her suitcase, though she wasn't sure anyone in the next town would care about them either. She had her pride. That was less certain. 6 months earlier, Clara had stepped off the eastbound stage in Willow Creek with a trunk full of textbooks and the kind of hope that only survives in people who've never been broken before. She was 28 years old. She was a plus-size woman with warm brown eyes and chestnut hair she kept braided over one shoulder, and she had spent her entire adult life being underestimated by people who confused size with weakness and quiet confidence with uncertainty. Missouri had been kind to her mostly. She'd taught there for 4 years at a small school outside of Springfield, and when the letter arrived from the Montana Territorial Board offering her a position in Willow Creek, she'd read it 3 times before she let herself believe it was real. A frontier school, a real community that needed her, a chance to do something that mattered in a place where it mattered most. She told her landlady she was going west. Her landlady said, "Lord have mercy, Clara, you sure about that?" Clara said she was. She was wrong, but she didn't know it yet. Willow Creek greeted her, the way small western towns greeted most strangers, with a guarded courtesy that passed for welcome if you didn't look too closely. The school board chairman, a thin man named Aldrich with a gray mustache and a formal handshake, showed her the schoolhouse and told her she'd have between 18 and 25 students, depending on the season, and which families had brought their cattle in from the outer ranges. He told her supplies were limited. He told her the previous teacher had left after 4 months. He did not tell her why. Clara found out on her own. The previous teacher had been a young man from Ohio who'd made the mistake of correcting one of Henry Wallace's ranch hands in public and found himself run out of town inside of a week. Henry Wallace was the kind of man who never forgot when someone made him look small, and he had the money and the influence to make sure the feeling was mutual. Clara didn't know any of that on her first morning when she stood at the front of a classroom full of children ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Chalk in hand, heart hammering, and introduced herself with a voice that only shook once. What she knew was that these children deserved someone who showed up. So she showed up, every single day. She stayed late to help the older boys who read at the level of the younger ones who were ashamed of it, and hid their confusion behind noise and disruption until she figured out how to reach them. She brought extra food from her own meals for the 3 Hanson children who came to school hungry more mornings than not. She started a correspondence system for families who needed letters written to relatives out east, drafting each one at her kitchen table by lamplight after the children were gone and the schoolroom was quiet. She fell in love with the work the way she always had, completely and without apology. The first person to go cold on her was Ruth Wallace. Clara noticed it in the way women notice things, not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of small ones. A greeting that used to be warm, becoming clipped. An invitation to Sunday supper that stopped coming. A look exchanged between Ruth and another woman at the Mercantile that lasted a half-second too long when Clara walked in. Ruth was Henry Wallace's wife. She was somewhere in her early 50s, handsome in a sharp way, and she'd run the social landscape of Willow Creek for long enough that most people had forgotten there was a time before her. She hadn't liked Clara from the beginning. Clara understood that much. She'd felt the assessment in Ruth's eyes on their very first meeting, the slow up and down that landed somewhere between judgment and dismissal. But whatever Ruth thought of her privately, she'd been civil enough in public. Until October, when her nephew arrived in town. Dalton Wallace was 24, broad-shouldered, and accustomed to being charming enough to get away with most things. He came to Willow Creek to help his uncle with a land dispute, and stayed 3 weeks longer than he was supposed to. He sat in the front pew at Sunday service and smiled at Clara across the aisle with the practiced ease of a man who had never been told no and wasn't particularly interested in hearing it now. The first time he offered to carry her books from the Mercantile, she thanked him politely and declined. The second time he appeared at the schoolhouse after hours with a bottle of wine and a grin, she was considerably less polite. "Mr. Wallace," she said, and her voice was very quiet and very steady. "I think you should leave." Something shifted in his expression. Not anger exactly, more like recalibration, like a man who had expected a door to open and was now measuring the lock. "Miss Whitmore," he said, still smiling. "I'm only being friendly." "No," Clara said. "You're not." He left. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't even close to the end of it. By November, the rumors had started. She didn't hear them directly at first. She heard them the way you hear weather coming, a change in the air, a tension in ordinary conversations, something slightly off. In the way the hardware store owner avoided her eyes when he used to look her straight in the face. She heard them in the way Aldrich coughed uncomfortably when she asked him about the school's supply order, and looked everywhere in the room except at her. And then, one afternoon in December, Berta Hanson, the mother of the 3 children, Clara fed from her own pocket, came to the schoolhouse door. She was a raw-boned woman with sun-weathered skin and the look of someone who had swallowed too many difficult things in her life and was bracing to swallow one more. "Miss Whitmore." She didn't come inside. "I think you ought to know what people are saying." Clara set down her chalk. "Tell me." Berta told her. Dalton Wallace had told his uncle that Clara had been carrying on with Pete Calloway, a married ranch hand who worked the South Range. He said he'd seen it himself. He said he wasn't the only one. He told the story with enough specific detail to sound like truth, and enough righteous injury to sound like a man who'd been genuinely troubled by what he'd witnessed. Pete Calloway's wife had confronted Pete in the middle of the general store in front of 6 witnesses, weeping and screaming. Pete denied everything because there was nothing to deny, but the denial came too late and landed too soft against a story that had already traveled the full length of the town. Clara stood very still while Berta talked. "I don't believe it," Berta said quickly. "I want you to know that. Not for a second. Thank you, Clara said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. But Berta stopped. She pressed her lips together. Some of the other mothers, they're worried. They say they don't want their children. I understand, Clara said. Miss Whitmore. I understand, Berta. Clara picked up the chalk again, turned back to the board, and wrote the next day's arithmetic problem in careful, even strokes. Thank you for telling me. Berta left. Clara finished writing the problem. Then she sat down in the teacher's chair, put her hands flat on the desk, and stared at the wall for a very long time. She waited for it to get better. She told herself that truth had weight, that it settled eventually, that the people who knew her really knew her would hold steady. Some of them tried. Reverend Ames said something measured and careful from the pulpit about the sin of false witness. Doc Hargrove told her quietly that he thought the whole business was a disgrace. Margaret Ellis, who kept house for William Carter, out on the northern range, stopped her on the street one afternoon and said in a voice that carried no uncertainty whatsoever, "Don't you let them shrink you." But Aldrich called her in for a meeting in January and used words like "unfortunate situation" and "concerns from the community," and "perhaps it would be best if we considered the children's welfare." He never accused her directly. He just sat there with his gray mustache and his formal hands and let the silence do the work. She asked him plainly whether he believed the rumors. He said, "Miss Whitmore, it isn't a matter of what I believe." She understood then. It was never going to be a matter of what anyone believed. It was a matter of what Henry Wallace wanted, and what Henry Wallace wanted was for her to be gone. She had embarrassed his nephew. She had said no to a Wallace, and in Willow Creek, that was not something that was forgiven quietly. She thought about fighting. She considered going to the town council, writing to the territorial board, asking for an investigation. She sat up 3 nights in a row, drafting letters. She never sent building arguments that were airtight and completely beside the point, because the point was never about the truth. The point was about power, and she didn't have any. Parents pulled their children from her class one by one through January and into February. First the Caldwells without explanation. Then the Morrison family, who sent a note that said only circumstances. Then the Hanson children, which was the one that hurt worst, because she knew what those mornings without breakfast cost them, and she knew that Berta Hanson had made that decision with a heavy heart and not enough options. By the second week of February, there were 6 children left in her classroom. By the end of the third week, there were none. She walked into the empty schoolroom on that Tuesday morning and stood in the doorway and looked at 23 empty chairs. She was done. She went back to her room and started packing. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. What would have been the point? The town had already decided what kind of woman she was. The town had already rendered its verdict. Announcing her departure would only give people the opportunity to feel relieved out loud, and she would not give them that satisfaction. She packed everything she owned into one suitcase. She left the key on the landlord's kitchen table with 3 weeks' back rent from the last of her savings. She wrote one letter to Reverend Ames thanking him for his small kindness and slid it under the church door before sunrise. Then she walked. She walked past the schoolhouse without stopping. She walked past the mercantile without looking in the window. She walked past the livery stable and past the edge of town and out onto the open road, and she put one foot in front of the other, and she did not look back. The road was hard-packed from recent frost, and the morning cold bit through her wool coat in a way that reminded her this was Montana in late February, and 40 miles was not a short walk for any person, let alone a woman alone with a heavy suitcase and no horse. She knew it. She'd calculated it as best she could. 3 days, maybe 4, if the weather turned. The trading post at Miller's Crossing was 12 miles out, and she could stop there for the night if she needed to use the last of her smaller coins for a cot and a meal. She could manage it. She had managed worse. She was somewhere in the first mile, maybe slightly past it, when she heard the hoofbeats. She didn't stop walking. She didn't turn. In this country, a rider on the road was not an unusual thing, and she had no reason to assume it had anything to do with her. She shifted her suitcase to her left hand, moved to the edge of the road, and kept her eyes forward. The hoofbeats slowed. They came alongside her. They stopped. Miss Whitmore. Clara stopped walking. She recognized the voice instantly, the way you recognize something that has been in the background of your life long enough that you'd stopped consciously noticing it was there. Low, unhurried, not asking anything from her. She turned. William Carter sat on his roan horse at the edge of the road, one hand loose on the reins, the brim of his dark hat shadowing his face against the morning sun. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, long in the leg, the kind of build that came from actual work, rather than the kind of work that only involved telling other people what to do. He was 35, maybe. She'd never been entirely sure. He had dark hair and deep blue eyes, and a face that had been weathered by years of outdoor living into something that was not classically handsome, but was considerably more interesting. He had never once laughed at her. In 6 months of living in Willow Creek, that had not been nothing. "Mr. Carter," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. He looked at her. Then he looked at the road ahead. Then he looked at her suitcase. Walking to Crestfall. "That's my business," she said. "It is," he agreed. I didn't move. He didn't push. He just sat there on his horse with the patience of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that silence was not the same as nothing. Clara looked at him for a moment longer than she intended to. "Why are you on this road at this hour?" she asked. "Heading to Miller's Crossing," he said. "Need to talk to a man about some fence wire." She had no way of knowing if that was true. She also had no way of knowing if it wasn't. "Then don't let me slow you down," she said, and picked up her suitcase and started walking again. For 3 seconds, she thought he was going to ride on. Instead, she heard him swing down from the saddle. The sound of his boots on the road came up beside her. "I can manage on my own, Mr. Carter," she said without looking at him. "I know you can," he said. He fell into step beside her. His horse followed obedient, the reins looped easy in his hand. Clara kept walking. "People will talk," she said flatly. "People are already talking," William said. "Don't seem to have slowed you down any." She glanced at him sideways. He was looking at the road. "What do you want?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "To make sure you reach somewhere safe," he said. "That's all." "I didn't ask for that." "No," he said. "You didn't." He kept walking. Clara stopped. He stopped too, a half step ahead of her, and turned. She looked at him directly. The morning light was full on his face now, and she could see the steadiness in his expression, the absence of anything that looked like pity or performance. He wasn't doing this to be seen doing it. There was nobody here to see. "Why?" she said. It was the only word that mattered. William looked at her for a long moment. "Because you shouldn't have to do this part alone," he said. "And because what this town did to you was wrong, and I've been angry about it for weeks, and riding beside you on this road is the only useful thing I can think to do about that anger right now." Clara stared at him. In 6 months, nobody had said anything like that to her, not even close. She didn't know what to do with it. She stood there on that frozen road in the early Montana morning with her suitcase in one hand and the cold burning her ears, and she genuinely, completely did not know what to do with a sentence like that. "You barely know me," she finally said. "I know enough," William said. "What does that mean?" "It means I've watched you work," he said. "And I've watched this town, and I know the difference between a woman who deserves what happened to her and a woman who doesn't. You don't." Clara looked down at the road. Her jaw was tight. "I'm not looking for someone to rescue me," she said. "Good," he said, "because that's not what I'm offering." She looked up. "Then what are you offering?" William Carter looked her straight in the eye and said, "Company. And a horse if your arms get tired. And maybe someone to talk to or not talk to, whatever you prefer. 40 miles is a long way. You don't have to walk it with me. But I'm going the same direction, and I'd rather not go separately if you're willing." It was the least romantic offer she had ever received. It was also somehow exactly what she needed. She considered him for another long moment. Then she looked at the road stretching out ahead, long and empty and cold and leading nowhere she had ever been. Then she looked back at him. "I'm not going to pretend to be grateful," she said. Not yet. That's fine, William said. And I make my own decisions. I'd expect nothing else. And if I tell you to ride ahead and leave me alone, you'll do it. Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. Miss Whitmore, he said, I am a man who respects a boundary. She almost laughed. She caught it before it got out, swallowed it back down, but it had been there. That had surprised her. All right, she said. She started walking again. William fell into step beside her, his horse trailing quiet behind them both, and the road unrolled ahead into the pale Montana morning. And for the first time since she'd packed her suitcase, Clara Whitmore felt something that was not quite hope, but was close enough to keep her feet moving. She had no idea what was waiting for her at the end of this road. She had no idea what waited for her in the space between here and there, but she was walking toward it. And for the first time in a very long time, she was not entirely alone. They walked in silence for the first mile, and Clara decided she preferred it that way. She was not interested in conversation. She was not interested in being comforted or reassured or told that everything was going to be fine by a man who had no way of knowing whether it would be or not. She had heard enough well-meaning words in the past 6 months to last her the remainder of her life, and most of them had turned out to mean nothing at all when it counted. So she walked, and William Carter walked beside her and said nothing, and his horse walked behind them both with the patient, untroubled rhythm of an animal that had learned a long time ago that its job was simply to be ready. The cold was significant. February in Montana was not the kind of cold that apologized for itself. It came in through the collar of her coat and settled at the back of her neck and worked its way down her spine with a slow, deliberate persistence that had nothing personal in it and was somehow worse for that. Her fingers around the suitcase handle were already going stiff. She switched hands again, flexed the cold one inside her coat pocket, and kept her eyes on the road. You can put that in the saddlebag, William said. I'm fine. It's not a kindness, it's practical. You'll lose feeling in that hand before we reach the first rise. She wanted to argue. She recognized the impulse clearly enough to be slightly embarrassed by it. This was what 6 months of being diminished did to a person. It made them refuse help even when the help was reasonable, because refusing had become the only form of control they had left. She stopped walking and held out the suitcase. William took it without comment, without any expression that could be read as victory, and tied it to the saddlebag with quick, efficient hands. Then he stepped back, and they started walking again, and the matter was settled. Thank you, Clara said. Don't mention it. Another stretch of quiet. Clara pulled her coat tighter and thought about the 40 miles ahead and the $3.40 in her inside pocket and tried to work out the arithmetic of what came next. The railroad to Denver. Denver to St. Louis probably. She had a cousin in St. Louis she hadn't written to in 2 years. She could start over there. Find a school that needed a teacher. Find a room she could afford until the first paycheck came. Start again. She had started again before. She could do it once more. She was so deep in the arithmetic of survival that she almost missed it when William spoke. How long did you know? He said. She glanced at him. Know what? That the rumors had started. She considered lying. Old habit. The reflex to protect yourself by minimizing the damage by making it sound smaller than it was, so that the other person's pity wouldn't land quite so heavy. December, she said instead. He nodded slowly. And you stayed through February. I thought it would correct itself, she said. I thought people would see through it eventually. Some of them did. Not enough of them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dalton Wallace is a coward. The word landed cleanly. Not an opinion offered tentatively. A fact stated and left on the table. Something moved in Clara's chest. A small, fierce, involuntary response to hearing someone else say out loud the thing she had been thinking alone for 3 months. Yes, she said. He is. His uncle's worse, William said. At least Dalton's just stupid and mean. Henry knows exactly what he's doing. Clara looked at the road. Did you know, she said, about why the last teacher left? I heard about it afterward. Did you do anything? The question came out harder than she intended. She heard the edge in it and didn't try to soften it. It was a real question. She wanted a real answer. William was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man looking for a comfortable lie. The quiet of a man sitting with something uncomfortable that he'd probably sat with before. "No," he said. "Not enough. I kept my distance. Told myself it wasn't my fight." He paused. "I was wrong about that." Clara stared at him. "You're telling me this right now," she said. "Seemed like the right time." "The right time was 4 months ago." "Yes," he said. "It was." He didn't flinch from it, didn't qualify it or reach for an excuse. He said yes and let it stand. Clara turned back to the road. Her heart was doing something complicated that she didn't have language for yet. She filed it away and kept walking. They made the first rise before mid-morning, and from the top of it, she could see the land rolling out in every direction, wide and cold and indifferent and undeniably, almost painfully beautiful. She'd noticed that about Montana from the beginning. The land didn't care about human problems. It just kept being enormous. "We'll reach Miller's Crossing by afternoon if we keep this pace," William said. He looked at her. "I told you, I'm going the same direction. You said you needed fence wire." "I do. From Miller's Crossing." "That's right." Clara narrowed her eyes. "The Miller's Crossing trading post doesn't sell fence wire, Mr. Carter. I've been there twice. They sell dry goods and ammunition and very poor quality coffee. Nobody buys fence wire from Amos Miller." William was quiet for exactly 1 second too long. He said. "You made that up." "I needed a reason that would make sense quickly." "So you lied." "I improvised." "That's the same thing." "It is," he admitted. "I apologize." Clara stopped walking and turned to look at him fully. He stopped too. His expression was not quite sheepish, but there was something around the eyes that conceded the point. "Then why?" she said. "Why are you actually on this road?" He met her eyes. "Because I watched you walk past my property line from my front porch this morning," he said. "You were carrying that suitcase, and you were alone, and the temperature was 22 degrees, and 40 miles is a long way to walk without a reason to be sure you'd make it. So I saddled up." The honesty of it was almost disorienting. She had been braced for performance for the kind of chivalric speech that was really about the man giving it, and instead, he had given her something that had no decoration on it whatsoever. "You watched me from your porch," she said slowly. "My property sits right at the north edge of town. I know where your property sits. Then you walked right past it." She had. She remembered passing the break in the fence that marked the edge of the Carter land and thinking that the property looked well kept, even in winter, even in the early morning, which had struck her as the kind of detail that said something true about the person who owned it. "How long were you watching?" she said. Something moved in his expression. Not quite embarrassment, but something in that neighborhood. "Long enough to go inside and get my coat," he said. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her pace and started walking again. "Keep up, Mr. Carter," she said, and he did. By the time they reached the halfway point between Willow Creek and Miller's Crossing, Clara had stopped counting the distance in miles and started measuring it in the increments of their conversation, which had opened up gradually, the way a creek opens up in late winter. Carefully at first, then with more confidence until it was moving with a current of its own. She had not intended to talk. She had meant to keep her interior life exactly where it had been for the past 3 months, which was locked up and unavailable for public inspection. But William Carter had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like interrogation. He asked about Missouri. He asked how she'd come to teaching. He asked whether she'd grown up with books or come to them later. She told him about her mother, who had taught her to read using a Bible and a farmer's almanac, and had considered both equally sacred for different reasons. She told him about the school outside Springfield and the boy named Samuel, who'd come to her at 14, unable to read his own name, and left at 16, able to read the newspaper well enough to know when the world was lying to him, which Clara had told him was the most important skill a person could have. William listened, not with the performed attention of someone waiting for their turn to talk. He actually listened. "You love it," he said at one point. Not a question. "Teaching," Yes. More than anything else I know how to do, Clara said. Then that's what matters. It doesn't matter much if nobody will let me do it. Willow Creek isn't the only town in the territory, he said. I'm aware. There are schools in Crestfall, and Helena, and Butte if you don't mind the mining crowd. Are you giving me career advice right now, Mr. Carter? I'm making conversation, Miss Whitmore. It sounds like advice. Maybe it is a little. She almost smiled. She felt the shape of it threatening at the corner of her mouth and flattened it deliberately. She was not ready to smile at this man. She was not ready to be the kind of person who smiled yet. They reached Miller's Crossing trading post in the middle of the afternoon when the sun had moved enough to take most of its warmth with it, and the cold had reasserted itself with renewed conviction. Amos Miller, who was 70 if he was a day, and had the personality of a man who had outlived his patience for unnecessary pleasantries, sometime around 1871, looked up from behind his counter when they came through the door and surveyed them with the expression of someone who has seen most things and been surprised by very few of them. Carter, he said. Then his eyes moved to Clara. Ma'am. Mr. Miller, Clara said. You headed east or west? East, she said. He looked at the two of them together in that assessing way old men had when they were doing arithmetic about things that were none of their business. Then he turned back to William. You stay in the night. If you've got room, William said. Got 2 rooms. One's got a broken stove and the other one's cold. Your choice. I'll take the one with the broken stove, Clara said. I can probably fix a stove. Amos Miller looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Can you? I've done it before. He considered this. Then he reached under the counter and produced a key on a bent nail. Room at the end, he said. Tools are in the shed out back. You break anything else you owe me for it. Fair enough, Clara said, and took the key. She was halfway to the back hallway when she heard Amos say to William, in the particular quietness of a man who thinks he's talking under the range of someone's hearing, but is not, that's a capable woman. And she heard William say just as quietly, Yes, she is. She kept walking. But the flatness of it, the simple factual way he'd said it with no performance and no audience pressed against something inside her that she'd thought was sealed off. She fixed the stove. It took her 40 minutes and a bent piece of tin from the shed and a considerable amount of determination. And when she lit it and the heat began to fill the small room, she stood in front of it with her hands out and felt a satisfaction that was partly about the warmth and partly about the fact that she still could. Dinner was beans and salt pork, and more of the very poor quality coffee she'd remembered, and she and William sat at the small table in the corner of Amos's trading post, while the old man dozed in his chair by the front door and the fire in the main room settled into its evening rhythm. Tell me something, Clara said. William looked up from his coffee. What do people in Willow Creek say about you? She asked. He thought about it. That I'm fair, he said. That I pay my hands on time. That I don't talk much and I don't join in on things. What kinds of things? The kind that are other people's business. Clara turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. Is that what this was, other people's business? He held her gaze. It should have been more than that. I told you already. You did, she said. I'm asking why it wasn't. He was quiet for a moment. When I first came to Willow Creek, he said, I made the mistake of putting myself in the middle of something I thought was wrong. A dispute between 2 families about water rights. I spoke up for the one I thought was being treated unfairly. He paused. The family I defended lost anyway, and I spent the next 2 years building back the relationships I'd burned by taking a side. The ranch nearly didn't survive it. He looked at the table. I learned to be careful, and then you were too careful, Clara said. Yes, he said. And then I was too careful. She looked at him across the small table in the firelight of Amos Miller's trading post. This quiet man who had built something real and protected it by learning to stay still. And she understood him in a way that surprised her with its completeness. She knew what it was to make yourself smaller to survive. She'd been doing it for months. She'd done it so long she'd almost forgotten there was a larger version of herself. What made you get on that horse this morning? She said. He looked up. What finally made it enough? she pressed. After all those months of being careful. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not uncertain exactly, but stripped of the layers he usually kept in place. "I saw you walk past my fence line," he said. "Alone, in that cold, with that suitcase. And I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought if I let this happen, if I let her walk out of this territory alone because I was too cautious to move, then I'm not the man I thought I was. And I'd rather find that out now than live with it later." Clara set down her coffee cup. The fire crackled. Amos Miller snored once and resettled in his chair. "That's an honest answer," Clara said finally. "I try. Most men don't." "I've noticed," William said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "All right." "Did you know," she said, "did you know what Dalton Wallace was doing when he was doing it, not after, during?" The pause before he answered was long enough that she knew the answer before he gave it. "I heard talk," he said carefully. "I didn't know the full shape of it, but I heard enough that I should have said something and I didn't." There it was. Clara sat with it, let it settle. "Why are you telling me that?" she said. "You didn't have to. You asked me to tell you the truth. Most people would have found a more comfortable version of it." "I'm not interested in comfortable," he said. "Not with you." She looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" William leaned forward slightly, both forearms on the table, and looked at her directly in a way that had nothing tentative about it. "It means that since September I have watched you work in that schoolhouse. I have watched you handle the kind of cruelty that breaks most people without letting it change who you are. I have watched you give away your own food to children whose families couldn't feed them, and write letters at midnight for people who could barely sign their own names, and show up every single morning with more grace than anyone in that town deserved from you." He paused. "And I thought you were extraordinary before any of this happened. And I was too careful to say so. And I'm done being that careful." Clara stared at him. Her heart was hammering in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, or the long walk, or the exhaustion of the day. It was the hammering of someone hearing words they had long since stopped expecting to hear. "You don't know me," she said. The same words she'd said this morning, but they had less certainty in them now. "I know what I've seen," he said. "And what I've seen is enough to tell me that letting you walk out of Montana without saying something true to you would be the greatest mistake I ever made by keeping my mouth shut." The fire settled. The room was warm. Outside, the February dark had come down complete, and the wind was picking up, throwing itself against the shutters with a low, purposeful sound. Clara looked at the man across the table from her. This careful, quiet, sometimes too still man who had gotten on a horse that morning because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't, and she felt something shift inside her. Not toward him, not yet, not with any clear definition. But something that had been locked up for a very long time had just registered that there might be a key. "I'm still leaving," she said. "I know. I'm not staying in Willow Creek. I'm not asking you to. I'm not making any decisions tonight, about anything." "That's wise," he said. "Don't agree with everything I say," she said sharply. "It's annoying." That stopped him. Then the corner of his mouth moved. "I'll work on that." "Good." She pushed back from the table. "I'm going to sleep. We have more miles tomorrow." "We do." "Good night, Mr. Carter." "Good night, Miss Whitmore." She was almost to the hallway when she stopped. She wasn't sure why. Something pulled at her, some unfinished thread in the conversation that she hadn't quite accounted for. She turned back. "William," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and they both noticed it. "What you said, about watching me." He waited. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing it, even when you didn't say anything, for at least seeing it." His expression changed in a way that she couldn't fully read and didn't try to. "Clara," he said. Her name in his mouth was careful and exact and entirely deliberate. "I should have said something months ago. The fact that I didn't is something I'll carry, but I'm saying it now." She stood in the doorway for a moment, Then she nodded once and turned and went down the hall to the room where she'd fixed the stove, and she climbed into the narrow bed and pulled the blankets up and lay in the warmth she'd made with her own hands and stared at the ceiling. She was not ready to trust him. She was not ready to soften the place inside her that had gone hard and cautious and self-sufficient through sheer necessity. But she was also, for the first time in months, not entirely sure that the hardness needed to be permanent. She fell asleep thinking about what he'd said, and the exact flatness of his voice when he said it, and the absence of any performance in it whatsoever. Morning came with a change in the weather. The wind had shifted overnight, and the air had a different quality to it. Not warmer exactly, but dense in a way that people who lived in that country recognized without being taught. Clara felt it when she pushed open the door of the trading post and stepped outside, and she looked at the sky for a long moment before going back in. Amos Miller was already up standing at his stove with a coffee pot. "Storm coming," she said. "Yep," he said without looking up. "How long do we have?" He considered. "Could be today, could be tomorrow. Hard to say exactly, but she's comin' regardless." Clara sat down at the table. William came in from outside a few minutes later, having checked on his horse, and she told him what Amos had said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat and thought about it, with the particular focus of a man running practical calculations in his head. "We could push on," he said. "If we move fast, we might clear the main stretch before it hits. Or," she said, "or we wait it out here." "How long?" "Day, maybe 2. She thought about 2 more days on this road, 2 more days of this closeness, 2 more nights of conversations that stripped things down to their essential truth in ways she hadn't prepared for. She thought about the railroad at Crestfall. She thought about St. Louis and her cousin and the life waiting to be rebuilt. Then she thought about 23 empty chairs. "We push on," she said. William nodded. They ate quickly. Amos packed them each a portion of cornbread wrapped in cloth and charged William for both without asking, which Clara noticed and stored away. They stepped out into the heavy morning and started walking. An hour in the storm made its decision. It didn't announce itself gradually. It came in from the northwest with a sudden authority that changed every calculation they'd made, dropping the temperature and throwing sleet that came in at an angle and had no interest in being manageable. Clara ducked her chin into her collar and kept moving. Her boots were good. She'd at least had the sense to wear her good boots. "There's a shelter," William said, raising his voice over the wind. "Trappers lean-to about a mile east. I know this land." "Of course you do," she said. "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation." "Can you make a mile in this?" She looked at him. "Can you?" He almost smiled. "Come on." They moved fast. His horse was steady and calm beside them, and when the sleet thickened into something approaching snow, William did something she didn't expect. He angled his body between her and the wind without a word, without any indication that he was doing it as a gesture. He just moved, like it was obvious, like of course that was where he should be. Clara noticed and said nothing. The lean-to was exactly what the name suggested, but it was solid and dry inside and out of the wind, and once William had his horse secured and they had themselves settled. The relative quiet was almost startling after the noise of the storm. Clara unwrapped the cornbread and handed him half. "Thank you," he said. "Don't mention it," she said, which made him look at her. "Using my words back at me seemed efficient." He laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh, a real one, short and unguarded, and it changed something in his face that made him look younger and less weathered, and entirely different from the careful, quiet man she'd been constructing in her understanding of him. She looked away. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, and he did. He talked about it with a directness that had no performance in it. The same way he talked about everything, describing not the romance of it, but the reality, the years of failed crops and the hard winter of '78 that had killed half his cattle and nearly killed the dream itself, the hands who'd stayed through it, and the ones who hadn't, the slow process of building something sustainable out of something that had repeatedly threatened to collapse. "Why didn't you quit?" she asked. "Because I'd already paid too much of myself for it," he said. And because I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's not a very inspiring reason. No, he agreed. But it's a true one. She thought about that. Is that enough? She said. Stubbornness and nowhere else to go. It got me through 5 years, he said. After that I had something real, something worth protecting for its own sake, rather than just because I'd invested in it. He looked at her. The reasons change. The commitment doesn't have to. Clara was quiet. She was thinking about Missouri, and the school outside Springfield, and the boy named Samuel, and the feeling she'd had the first morning she walked into the Willow Creek schoolhouse and saw 23 chairs waiting for her. The reason she'd come west. The reason she'd stayed through December and January and into February. The commitment that had survived even when the reason underneath it had been poisoned. Margaret, she said suddenly, your housekeeper. She stopped me on the street once, in January. I know. She told me not to let them shrink me. That sounds like Margaret. She meant it. Margaret only says what she means, William said. It's her most consistent quality. Does she know you're on this road right now? He paused. She does. What did she say? Another pause. Longer this time. She said it was about time. Clara stared at the far side of the lean-to for a long moment. Outside, the storm moved and howled and did whatever it was going to do, completely indifferent to the two people sitting still in the middle of it. About time for what exactly? She said. I didn't ask for clarification, William said. That's convenient. Margaret can be very pointed when she wants to be. I've learned not to invite the full version. And yet you came anyway. Despite the full version, yes. She looked at him sideways. And there it was again, that shape at the corner of her mouth, that insistence of something she'd been suppressing for days. She let it come this time. Just slightly. Just enough that he might see it. He did see it. She could tell by the way the tension in his expression shifted into something quieter and more settled, like a man who has been waiting for something and has just seen it on the horizon. They sat through the storm. They talked about things large and small. Her father, who had farmed and read voraciously, and told her that a person who knew how to read would never be entirely lost. His mother, who had died when he was 19 and left him the property and no instructions whatsoever for what to do with either. The particular cruelty of winter in high country versus low. The best way to make cornbread when you had good butter, and the worst way when you didn't. When the storm broke in the late afternoon, it left the world clean and white and soundless, and they stepped out into it and looked at the sky that had gone a pale clear blue behind the passing weather, and Clara breathed the washed air and felt something in her chest that had been tight for a very long time loosen by a single degree. Not enough to trust, not enough to stay, but enough. We should move before dark, William said. Yes, Clara said. They started walking again. They were 2 miles past the lean-to when William's horse pulled up short and stood with its ears forward and its head up in the posture of an animal that has heard something concerning. William stopped immediately. Clara stopped beside him. What is it? She said quiet. Don't know yet. He watched the horse. His hand moved to his side, not drawing, just positioning. Stay close. 2 riders came around the bend ahead. They were not anyone Clara recognized, which was both a relief and its own category of problem. Strangers on an empty road in the fading afternoon light were not automatically dangerous, but they were not automatically not either, and the way they spread out slightly as they approached, one edging left, one edging right, was a spacing that had a specific purpose. Afternoon, said the one on the left. He was heavy-set mid-40s with an easy manner that sat slightly too loose on top of something watchful. Bit late to be on foot. We're managing, William said, heading to Crestfall. That's right. The man on the left looked at Clara. It was a slow look, the kind that had nothing respectful in it, and Clara met it directly without flinching, because she had been looked at like that before, and she had found that flinching never helped. Long walk for a lady, he said. She's capable, William said. I can speak for myself, Clara said to William, and then to the man, yes, long walk. We're doing it anyway. Something shifted in the man's expression. He hadn't expected the directness. What's your name? He said. None of your business, Clara said. That pulled his eyebrows up. Beside him, the second rider, younger, quieter, watching William with the focused attention of someone who had done this kind of calculation before moved his horse one more step to the right. William had gone very still. It was a different kind of stillness from his usual quiet, tighter, concentrated at the center. "We don't want trouble," William said. His voice had changed. The measured calmness was still there, but underneath it was something with edges. "Nobody does," said the man on the left. "Then I suggest you ride on," William said. "We'll do the same." The moment stretched. Clara counted her own heartbeats. Then the man on the left looked at her one more time in that same slow way, and she looked back at him with the full weight of everything she had been carrying for 6 months. The rumors and the empty schoolroom, and the 23 chairs, and the long cold walk, and all of it. And he must have seen something in her face that registered, because he made a small sound and lifted his reins. "Cold afternoon for a walk," he said to nobody in particular. And they rode on. Clara let out a slow breath. William watched the riders until they were a significant distance down the road. Then he looked at her. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And she was. She was completely fine, and her hands were not shaking, and she was already thinking about the next 2 miles and what they needed to do before dark. William watched her for a moment. "You didn't flinch," he said. "Flinching doesn't help," she said. He looked at her for one long moment. "No," he said, "it doesn't." They walked on. The light was going, and the road was quiet again, and Clara Whitmore, who had left Willow Creek alone with a suitcase and $3.40, and nowhere particular to be walked through the white and silent aftermath of the storm, with a man she had not expected toward a destination that was somehow becoming less certain in a way that felt less like danger and more like something she didn't have a word for yet. She wasn't sure when that had happened. She wasn't entirely sure what to do about it. But she kept walking, and he kept walking beside her, and the Montana sky went dark and enormous above them both, and the cold was sharp and real, and the road was long, and none of it felt the way she had expected it to feel when she walked away from Willow Creek that morning, believing her story was ending. It did not feel like an ending at all. They reached a small roadside inn called the Pinewood just after dark, run by a stout woman named Edna Briggs, who asked no questions, charged fair prices, and made a beef stew that was the best thing Clara had eaten in 2 months. She ate every drop of it, and sopped the bowl with cornbread, and did not apologize for any of it, which made Edna Briggs look at her with the particular approval of a woman who had spent too many years watching other women eat half of everything and pretend they weren't hungry. "Your wife's got good sense," Edna told William, setting down a second round of coffee. "She's not my wife," William said. "She's not my husband," Clara said at the exact same moment. Edna looked between them. She said, and went back to her kitchen. Clara wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and did not look at William. William looked at the table. "She meant nothing by it," he said. "I know that. Just an assumption." I said I know. The silence that followed had a different quality from the silences they'd settled into on the road. Those had been comfortable, earned through miles. This one had a shape to it, an awareness. Clara drank her coffee. "2 rooms," William said. "Obviously," she said. He nodded and went to speak to Edna. Clara sat alone at the table and looked at the fire in the corner and told herself firmly and clearly that she was a woman with a destination and a plan, and $3.40, and a cousin in St. Louis, and that nothing about the past 2 days changed any of that. She told herself that the way her chest had moved when Edna Briggs said the word wife was purely reflexive. A flinch. Muscle memory from a life in which that word had not been a consideration for a very long time. She told herself all of that. She wasn't sure how much of it she believed. She slept hard and woke before dawn with the particular alertness of someone whose body has decided that rest is finished, whether the mind agrees or not. She lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the inn settle around her, and thought about Willow Creek. Not with grief exactly, more like the feeling of pressing on a bruise to determine whether it still hurt. It did, but differently than it had 3 days ago. The shape of the pain had shifted, which was not the same as healing, but was possibly the beginning of it. She got up dressed and went downstairs. William was already at the table with coffee. He looked up when she came in and said nothing, which she appreciated. She sat across from him, and Edna produced coffee without being asked, which she also appreciated, and they sat in the early morning quiet of the inn and drank it without needing to fill the space. "One more day to Crestfall," he said eventually. "I know. Weather's clear. If we make good time, we can reach it by evening." "All right." He looked at her over his cup. "You're quiet." "I'm always quiet in the morning." "You've been quiet since last night." "I've been quiet since February," she said. "Don't read too much into a specific instance." He considered that. Then he said, "Are you all right?" "Define all right." "Clara." "William." She set down her cup and looked at him directly. "I am functional. I am fed. I am rested. I am closer to Crestfall than I was yesterday. All of those things are true. And the rest?" She was quiet for a moment. "The rest I'm still working out," she said. "I'll let you know when I've got an answer." He nodded and went back to his coffee, and she went back to hers, and she thought that this particular quality of being allowed to be unresolved without pressure was something she had underestimated badly in her accounting of what mattered in another person. They left at first light. The road in the aftermath of the storm was firmer underfoot, the snow packed down by the cold into something close to solid, and the walking was easier than the days before. Clara set a strong pace, and William matched it without comment. His horse moved quietly beside them, carrying both their bags now, and the morning opened up around them with a pale crystalline clarity that was almost too sharp to look at directly. They had been walking for perhaps an hour when William said, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to anyway." "Probably. What did you think when you first arrived in Willow Creek, your real first impression? Not what you told people." She thought about it. Really thought about it, not reaching for the polished version she'd given in letters to her landlady in Missouri. "I thought it was harder than I expected," she said. "And lonelier. I thought the children were wonderful, and most of the adults were frightened. Frightened of not having enough. Frightened of anybody. Different frightened of looking soft in a place where soft got you hurt." She paused. "And I thought Henry Wallace was dangerous the first time I saw him." "You saw it that fast." "Women see men like him fast," she said. "We learn to." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry you had to. That's a kind thing to say." "It's a true thing." She glanced at him sideways. "You do that a lot. Say the true thing when most people would say the comfortable thing." "Is that a complaint?" "No," she said. "It's an observation." He had a habit of repeating her own conversational moves back at her, at the precise moment it would land most accurately, and she was starting to notice it was not accidental. They were perhaps 3 miles past the pinewood, and moving well, when the sound of a rider behind them came up fast. Too fast for the road conditions, the hoofbeats uneven and urgent, in a way that made both of them turn before they fully decided to. The rider was young. 20 maybe. She didn't recognize him at first, and then she placed him one of the Aldrich boys, the younger one Daniel, who had been in her class for exactly 4 weeks before his father pulled him out in January. He pulled his horse up hard, and the animal skidded slightly on the packed snow, and Daniel himself looked like a person who had been riding since before full light and was not entirely sure what to do now that he'd caught up. "Miss Whitmore," he said, breathless. Clara stopped walking. "Daniel." He looked at William, then back at her. "My father sent me." "Your father?" she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper. "He asked me to give you this. He said it was important. He said please." That last word landed with a weight that Aldrich's name alone would not have carried. Clara stared at the paper for a moment before she reached up and took it. She unfolded it. She read it once. Then she read it again more slowly. William watched her face. "What is it?" he said. She handed him the paper without speaking. He read it. The letter was in Aldrich's careful, formal hand. It said that 3 days prior, the day after Clara had left, a man named Pete Calloway had walked into the town council chambers and made a statement. Calloway had sworn before the council and God and the territorial charter that he had never had any inappropriate contact with Miss Clara Whitmore, not ever, not once, not in any form. He said he was ashamed that he had not said so more loudly sooner, and that he was saying it now because his wife had asked him to stand up for a woman who had done nothing wrong, and he was not going to refuse his wife that. Then, apparently emboldened by Calloway's presence, 2 other men had come forward. Then a woman, one of the mothers, who'd pulled her children from the school, who said she'd seen Dalton Wallace in the saloon drunk and bragging, describing in specific terms how he'd constructed the story and spread it and why. Dalton Wallace had left Willow Creek 4 days before any of this. He had told his uncle he had business elsewhere. He had not said goodbye. Henry Wallace, when called before the council, had said very little. He was a man who knew when a position had become untenable and had the intelligence to stop defending it before the defense made things worse. The council had voted unanimously to clear Clara's name, and Aldrich, rigid, formal, gray-mustached. Aldrich, who had told her it wasn't a matter of what he believed, had written personally to say that the teaching position was hers if she wanted it effective immediately, with a formal letter of apology to follow. William folded the letter and handed it back to her. Daniel Aldrich was still on his horse, watching her with the anxious expression of a young man who had ridden very fast on a cold morning for someone else's difficult conversation and wasn't sure how it was being received. "Your father sent you alone on this road," Clara said. "Yes, ma'am. He wanted to come himself, but the council had a session this morning that he couldn't." "That's fine," Clara said. "Daniel." "Ma'am." "You were in my class for 4 weeks." He looked at the ground. "Yes, ma'am." "Did you learn anything?" He looked up. Something moved in his young face that was part shame and part something more complicated. "You taught me that a river curves because it follows the path of least resistance," he said, "and that a river that doesn't carve its own path just spreads out and goes nowhere." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You remember that?" "Yes, ma'am. I remembered it the whole time." She folded the letter and put it inside her coat next to her teaching certificates. "Thank you for writing out," she said. "You tell your father I received the letter." "And," Daniel said, "should I tell him anything else? He'll want to know." "Tell him I received it," Clara said. "That's all for now." Daniel nodded, looked once at William with the uncertain expression of a young man reading a situation he wasn't sure he was old enough for, and then turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Clara stood in the road. The morning was clear and cold and completely quiet in the wake of the hoofbeats. William said nothing. She was grateful. She pressed one hand against the outside of her coat, feeling the shape of the letter through the wool. She thought about Pete Calloway walking into the council chambers. She thought about his wife, who she'd barely known, asking her husband to stand up for a woman he'd been afraid to defend for months. She thought about Aldrich writing the word please, which was a word she would have bet good money he'd forgotten how to use. She should have felt vindicated. She waited for the feeling, stood there in the cold road, and waited for it to arrive. What came instead was something more complicated and less satisfying. Not nothing, but not the clean relief she'd imagined in those long February nights when she'd lain awake, constructing the scenario in her head. The truth had come out. Just as she'd believed it would, just as she'd told herself it would during every long grinding week when it hadn't. It had come too late to matter in the way she'd needed it to matter. "Say something," she said. William looked at her. "What would you like me to say?" "Something true." He thought about it. "It's good news," he said. "And it doesn't fix anything. Both of those things are equally real." "Yes," she said. "The position is yours if you want it." "It was always mine," she said. "That's the part that's hard to sit with." She started walking. He fell into step beside her. "You could go back," he said, not urging, presenting. "Is that what you think I should do?" "I think you should do whatever you decide to do," he said. "Not what Aldrich asks, and not what I think." "What do you think?" she pressed. "I think Willow Creek doesn't deserve you back," he said. "And I think that's not a sufficient reason to stay away if going back is what you want." She walked for a long time without saying anything. The thing was, she realized she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. She had been so certain 2 days ago when she packed that suitcase. She had been a woman with a clear destination and a clear reason and the absolute conviction that she was moving away from something that was finished. Now the letter sat inside her coat, and the destination felt less certain, and the reason had shifted into something that required more careful examination. And there was the other thing. The thing she had been not thinking about since Edna Briggs said wife, and both of them corrected her at the same moment, which meant they had both been listening for it, which meant something she wasn't ready to name. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're going to anyway." She almost smiled. Almost. "If I went back to Willow Creek," she said carefully, "would you be on this road tomorrow?" The question hung in the cold air between them. She heard William's pace adjust slightly. "What are you asking me, Clara?" His voice was different, not alarmed. More like a man who has been walking toward something and has just realized how close he is to it. "I'm asking whether you're on this road because you needed to see me to safety," she said, "or whether you're on this road because of something else." He was quiet for 15 seconds. She counted. "Both," he said. She absorbed that. "In what proportion?" she said. "The second one considerably outweighs the first," he said. "And it has for some time." She looked at the road ahead. Her heart was doing the thing it had been doing at intervals since the trading post conversation, that hammering, that was not fear and was not quite the thing she used to call hope, but was something in the same territory. "You have terrible timing," she said. "I've been told. I am in the middle of the most difficult season of my life. I know. I am walking toward the railroad station with $3.40. $3.40 is workable. I don't know where I'm going to live." "I have thoughts on that," he said quietly. She stopped walking. He stopped. She turned to face him fully. The morning light was on his face, and he looked like a man who had made a decision and was not second-guessing it, which was both terrifying and against all reasonable intention, exactly the kind of steadiness she had been missing for longer than just 6 months. "William Carter," she said, "if you are about to say something that changes the nature of this conversation, I need you to understand something first." "All right," he said. "I am not a woman who needs rescuing," she said. "I have been clear about that from the start of this road." "You have." "I am not going to make a decision about my life because I'm afraid of what comes next, or because it seems like the easier path. I wouldn't expect that from you. And I am not." She stopped, started again. "I am not in a position to be sensible about any of this right now, and I need to be sensible, so whatever you were going to say, I need you to hold it." He looked at her. "For how long?" he said. "Until I've had time to think." "That's fair?" "Thank you." "Clara." "What?" "I'll hold it as long as you need," he said, "but I'm not taking it back." She stared at him. Then she turned around and started walking again. They didn't talk much for the next 2 hours, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people carrying something large and breakable between them, being very careful with it. Clara thought about the letter. She thought about the school. She thought about 23 chairs and the boy named Daniel, who'd remembered that a river has to carve its own path. She thought about her cousin in St. Louis, and whether she actually wanted to go there, or whether St. Louis had been a plan she'd built during the worst of things and was now holding on to out of stubbornness. She thought about Margaret Ellis telling her not to let them shrink her. She thought about what it meant to not be shrunk. They were perhaps 6 miles from Crestfall when they came to the top of a long rise, and below them at the bottom of a valley she hadn't known was there. A trading post sat adjacent to a small cluster of buildings with smoke coming from 3 chimneys, and the general quality of a place where people stopped and rested before pushing on. But that wasn't what made Clara stop. What made her stop was the man sitting on the porch of the trading post. Even at this distance, even after 6 months, she recognized the set of his shoulders. The particular way he held himself, like a man who'd never once questioned his right to take up space. The expensive coat that didn't quite fit the country he was in. Henry Wallace. "What?" she said. William had already seen him. His whole body had changed beside her. Not tense exactly, but gathered every part of him aligned and present and paying close attention. "He rode fast to get here," William said. "He's ahead of us," Clara said. "He's been ahead of us." He would have left Willow Creek before Aldrich sent Daniel, before the council meeting even. William's voice was even. He saw the way things were going. "He came here to intercept me," Clara said. The realization moved through her cold and flat. "He came here to have a conversation before you reached that railroad and got on a train to somewhere he couldn't follow," William said. "What kind of conversation?" William looked at her. "The kind where he makes it worth your while not to take what you know about his nephew's behavior to the territorial papers in Denver." Clara stared at him. "You think he came here to buy my silence?" "That's exactly what I think." She looked at Henry Wallace, sitting on that porch below them, confident and comfortable, and completely certain that the world would organize itself around what he needed the way it always had. She thought about 6 months. She thought about Pete Calloway's wife crying in the general store. She thought about the Hanson children walking to an empty schoolhouse. She thought about Berta Hanson's face when she came to tell her what people were saying, the look of a woman delivering a blow she hated landing. She started walking down the rise. "Clara," William said behind her. "I know," she said. "Come if you want to." He came. Henry Wallace looked up when they were 20 feet out. His expression went through several things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, and then the performance of easy confidence that men like him wore the way other men wore boots. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "What a surprise." "No, it isn't," Clara said. She stopped 6 feet from the porch. William stopped beside her 1 step back, and to her left, not in front of her. Behind her, but not between her and what she was walking toward. She noticed. It mattered. "I imagine you've heard the news from town," Wallace said, settling back in his chair with the ease of a man who owned things. "Unfortunate business. I want you to know I had no idea Dalton had—" "Don't," Clara said. He blinked. "Don't finish that sentence," she said. "Don't tell me you didn't know. Don't tell me you're sorry. Don't make any sounds in my direction that are shaped like an apology, because we both know you're not here to apologize, and I'm not here to receive one." His expression hardened slightly beneath the performance of ease. "Miss Whitmore, I'm simply trying to—" "I know what you're trying to do," she said. "And I'm going to save us both the time it would take to get there. You're going to offer me something. Money probably, or a letter of reference, or a contribution to whatever school I land in next. You're going to make it sound generous, and you're going to frame it as making things right when what you actually mean is making them quiet. And you're going to assume I'll take it because I'm a woman alone on a road with $3.40 and I don't look like someone with a lot of options." Henry Wallace was very still. The performance was gone now. "You do have limited options," he said. His voice had changed. The friendly surface was off it completely. "Funny," Clara said. "A week ago I would have agreed with you. And now?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Now I think you came all this way because you're afraid of a woman with a story and somewhere to tell it," she said. "And I think the fact that you rode through a winter storm to get here before me means I have considerably more options than you want me to believe." She watched it land. She watched him measure her. "The territorial papers," he said slowly. "I have the name of the editor in Denver," she said. "I wrote to him once about a curriculum proposal. He was very interested in the state of frontier education. I imagine he'd be interested in other aspects of frontier life as well." "That would be—" "Legal, yes. Entirely." She kept her voice level. "I'm not threatening you, Mr. Wallace. I'm answering your question about my options." He sat with it. The man on the porch and the woman in the road looked at each other across 6 feet of cold Montana morning, and the whole landscape was very quiet. Then Henry Wallace did something she hadn't expected. He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the laugh of a man who has just been beaten at a game he thought he was the only one playing and has the intelligence at least to recognize it. "Your father must have been something," he said. "How is a farmer who read everything he could get his hands on?" Clara said. "He told me the most dangerous person in any room is the one who knows more than you think they do." Sound advice. He had a lot of it. Wallace stood. He picked up his hat from the railing and turned it once in his hands. "I'll tell you what I'll actually do," he said. "Not a negotiation, just what I'm going to do for my own peace of mind." He met her eyes. "I'm going to make a contribution to the Willow Creek School. Anonymous. Enough for supplies for 2 years. And I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to ride back to my business, and I'm going to let this be over." Clara studied him. "And Dalton?" Something moved in his face. "Dalton is not coming back to Willow Creek." She held his gaze for one more moment. "All right," she said. He nodded once, put his hat on, looked at William. Some exchange passed between the two men that had no words in it and didn't need any. Then he walked around the side of the building toward the stable. Clara stood in the cold road and breathed. William came to stand beside her. She could feel him there, not touching, just present in that way he had of being beside her, without crowding the space she needed. "2 years of school supplies," he said. "It's not enough," she said, "but it's something." "You knew he'd fold." "I hoped he'd fold. There's a difference." "Your hands are shaking," he said. She looked down. They were slightly. "Adrenaline," she said. "Not fear." "I know," he said. They listened to Wallace's horse leave the stable yard and take the road north. The sound faded and then was gone. Clara looked at the trading post ahead of them, the smoke from its chimneys, the warmth implied by it. "I need coffee," she said. "That seems right," William said. They went inside. The woman behind the counter was younger than Edna Briggs and more talkative, and she set coffee in front of them without being asked, which was becoming a pattern that Clara was starting to see as the universe's most basic form of mercy. She wrapped her hands around the cup and felt the shaking in her fingers ease by degrees. William sat across from her and looked at his coffee and did not say anything for a while. Then he said, "That was one of the braver things I've ever watched anyone do. I was terrified," she said. "I know, that's what made it brave." She looked at him. "You stayed behind me," she said. "You didn't need me in front." "No," she said. "But some men would have put themselves in front anyway." He shrugged slightly. "Wouldn't have been any help to you." She turned her cup in her hands. The fire in the corner of the room crackled once and settled. Outside the road was empty and quiet and going on in both directions. "I've been thinking," she said, about what you said this morning, about holding something." He went still. "I said I needed time to think," she said. "I've been thinking." "Clara, let me finish." She looked at him directly. "I left Willow Creek 2 days ago because I believed there was no place for me there. Not because I hated the West, not because I was done with teaching, not because I'd stopped wanting to build something real somewhere. I left because I believed I'd been wrong about where I belonged. And now," he said. She held his gaze. "I don't think the place I belong is on a train to St. Louis," she said. "I think I've known that since Miller's Crossing, maybe sooner. But I needed to be sure I was deciding it because it was true, not because I was frightened or tired or desperate for something solid." "And are you sure?" he said. "Not completely," she said honestly, "but sure enough to say it out loud." The fire crackled. The woman behind the counter was doing something in the back room, and they were for all practical purposes alone. "What are you saying?" William said. His voice was careful, not protecting himself from the answer. Protecting the answer, whatever it was, from being rushed. Clara looked at this man, this quiet, honest, sometimes infuriating man, who had gotten on a horse at dawn because he couldn't sit still in good conscience, who had walked 40 miles of cold road beside her without making it about himself, who had stood one step behind her and let her face Henry Wallace with her own voice and her own words and her own standing. And she said the thing she had been working toward since the first night at Miller's Crossing, when she'd gone to sleep, thinking about the absence of performance in everything he said. "I'm saying I'm not getting on that train," she said. "I'm saying I want to see what there is to build, not because I have nowhere else to go, because I think there's something worth staying for." William Carter looked at her across the table in a trading post on the edge of the Montana wilderness, with the storm just gone, and the road just walked, and Henry Wallace just ridden away, and he breathed out slowly. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. "That's an answer I can work with," he said. "It's not a yes to everything," she said. It's a yes to finding out. Clara, he said. Finding out is all I'm asking. She looked at him for a long, full moment. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it. And the Montana morning held them both quiet and cold and enormous. And the road behind them stretched back toward everything she had walked away from, and the road ahead stretched toward something neither of them could fully see yet, and that she decided was exactly as it should be. They turned around before noon. There was no ceremony to it. Clara finished her coffee, set the cup down, and said, "I need to send a letter before we go back." William asked who to. She said her cousin in St. Louis. He asked what she would tell her. Clara said she'd tell her the plan had changed. She borrowed paper and ink from the woman behind the counter and wrote the letter in 10 minutes, which was faster than she'd expected, and told her something about the clarity of what she'd decided. She sealed it and paid for the postage from her $3.40 and handed it across the counter and watched it disappear into the mailbag, and that was that. The cousin in St. Louis would read the letter in 2 weeks and write back with something between understanding and bewilderment, and Clara would answer it eventually when she had more to explain. Right now, she didn't have more to explain. Right now, she had a road to walk in the opposite direction. "Ready," William said. "Don't push it," she said. He almost smiled and held the door. They walked back the way they'd come, which should have felt like retreat, and didn't. The road was the same road, the cold was the same cold. But something in the quality of the silence between them had shifted into something that had more ease in it. Less held breath. She'd said the thing. He'd heard it. The air between them had rearranged itself accordingly. They made good time. Better than the days before, because she wasn't carrying the suitcase in her hand, and she wasn't carrying the weight of the decision anymore either. And it turned out that both of those things had been slowing her down more than she'd acknowledged. William set a strong pace, and she matched it without effort, and by early afternoon they were back past the lean-to, and past the place where the storm had caught them, and the land around them was white and still and enormous. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. Not the version he'd given her in the lean-to, which had been about the difficulty of it, the years of near failure. "Tell me what it looks like in spring." He thought about it. "Green," he said. "More green than you'd believe after a winter like this one. The hills go green, and the creek comes up, and everything that looked dead for 5 months turns out to have been waiting." He paused. "The cattle are calving. There's always something going wrong, and always something going right simultaneously. Margaret makes a soup from the first spring vegetables that I've been looking forward to since October. What's in it? Depends on what comes up first. Early onions usually. Sometimes new potatoes if the cellar held. She puts in a piece of salt pork that she saves specifically for that soup, and she will not tell me where she hides it." Clara laughed. A real one, short and surprised out of her, and she heard it like something she'd forgotten the sound of. "I like her already," she said. "She'll like you back," he said. "She already does." "She doesn't know me. She knows enough," he said, and used her own words back at her so precisely that she glanced at him sideways and found him looking at the road ahead with the straightest face she'd seen all week. "You did that on purpose," she said. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. She shook her head. But she was still smiling, and she let herself keep it this time. The Pinewood Inn came into view in the late afternoon, and Edna Briggs looked at the two of them returning from the direction of Crestfall, with the satisfied expression of a woman whose read on a situation has been confirmed by subsequent events. "Thought you might be back," she said. "Don't," Clara said. "Didn't say a word," Edna said, and went to get the rooms. They ate supper together, and the conversation ranged widely and easily in the way conversations do when the main thing has been said and everything else is space for finding out. Clara talked about curriculum. She had thoughts about how a frontier school ought to work differently from what the territorial board prescribed, which assumed children who had regular attendance and stable home situations, and enough food to think on, none of which were reliably true out here. She wanted to work with what was real, rather than what the board and Helena imagined to be real. William listened with the attention he gave everything she said, which was complete and unperformed, and then he said, "There are 11 children within 5 miles of the Carter Ranch who can't get to Willow Creek School regularly. Younger ones mostly. Families on the outer range." Clara looked at him. "I know," he said. "I'm just telling you." "You're not just telling me anything," she said. "Their parents would pay what they could," he said. "Some in coin, some in kind. Margaret teaches the two youngest Harmon children their letters on Sundays already, but she'd be the first to tell you she's not a teacher." William. "I have a room in the east wing of the house that isn't used," he said. "Good light, south-facing. It would need some work, but the bones of it are right." "You've been thinking about this," she said. "I've been thinking about a lot of things," he said. She looked at him across the supper table in Edna Briggs's dining room. "Since when?" she said. "November," he said, and did not look away. November. Before the worst of it. Before the schoolroom emptied and Aldrich called his meeting. When she was still showing up every morning and teaching the children who were still there and hoping the ones who'd left would come back. He'd been thinking about this since November. She took a breath. "One thing at a time," she said. "Of course," he said. "The ranch first. I need to see it before I decide anything." "That's reasonable." "And I'm not making any decisions about a room or a school or anything else until I've talked to Margaret." "Also reasonable." "And if I decide it's not right, then we figure out what is right," he said simply. "That doesn't change." She held his gaze for a moment. "You're very certain for a man who's known me 4 days, she said. "I've known you 6 months, he said. 4 days is just when we started talking." She looked at the table. Her throat was doing something she wasn't prepared to manage in a public dining room. "Eat your supper," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They left at first light, as had become their habit, and the road back toward Willow Creek, or rather toward the Carter Ranch, which sat 4 miles north of Willow Creek's main road, and therefore could be reached without passing through the town itself. A fact that Clara noted and appreciated, took them through country that looked different going back than it had going forward. She noticed things she'd been too raw to see on the way out. The way the land opened up after the second rise, into something that was not quite valley and not quite plain, but had the quality of a natural shelter protected on 3 sides by the curve of the hills. The way the sky over Montana had a particular depth to it, like the blue went back farther than blue was supposed to go. The way William moved through this country with the ease of something native to it, not born here, but grown here, shaped by the specific resistance of this specific land. She thought about spring and green hills and the creek coming up. She thought about 11 children who couldn't get to town. She thought about a south-facing room with good light. She stopped thinking about it because one thing at a time was a rule she intended to keep. They reached the Carter Ranch in the late afternoon of the following day, coming up the track from the south as the light was going gold and flat, and the kind of beautiful that arrived without asking permission and made no apologies for its effect. Clara had not known what to expect. She had built some version of it in her head during the days of walking the broad strokes of a working ranch, functional and sparse, organized around the business of cattle. She had not built the particular quality of the place, which was something she felt before she could name. It had the feeling of somewhere that had been argued with and argued back, and eventually come to a working agreement. Not easy, not soft, but settled. Like the land and the buildings had decided on each other. A woman came out of the main house before they were halfway up the track. Margaret Ellis was somewhere in her mid-50s, compact and purposeful, with dark eyes that moved quickly, and hands that looked like they had never once been idle. She walked toward them with the directness of someone who had decided something already and was simply closing the distance between herself and the conversation. She stopped in front of Clara. She looked at her for a moment, and Clara looked back, and neither of them said anything. Then Margaret said, "You fixed Amos Miller's stove." Clara blinked. "How did you know that?" "Amos Miller's wife is my second cousin," Margaret said. "She mentioned it in a letter that arrived this morning, which tells you something about how fast news travels in this country." She looked Clara up and down, not the assessing look that had a hierarchy in it, but the look of someone taking an honest inventory. "Come inside," she said. "You look like you've been on the road for a week." 4 days, Clara said. "That's a week," Margaret said, and turned back toward the house. Clara glanced at William. He shrugged slightly, the shrug of a man who had lived with Margaret for 12 years and had long ago stopped trying to predict her. They went inside. The house was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something cooking that had been cooking for a long time and was better for it. And Margaret put Clara at the kitchen table and put food in front of her and coffee beside it, and did all of this with the efficiency of someone who understood that bodies needed tending before conversations could happen. Clara ate. William ate. Margaret sat across from them both and drank her own coffee and watched. "She's staying," Margaret said to William eventually. Not a question. "She's considering," William said. "She's staying," Margaret said, and looked at Clara. "You fixed Amos Miller's stove because you needed to prove something to yourself. Not to Amos, not to anyone else. To yourself." She paused. "You've been proving things to yourself for a while now. You're tired of it." Clara set down her fork. "You don't know me," she said. The third time she'd said that to someone in 4 days, and each time it had been slightly less convincing. "I know enough," Margaret said, and now Clara heard the echo complete. William saying her own words back to her. And now Margaret saying William's words back to them both. And there was something in that recursion that felt less like coincidence and more like something being shown to her. 11 children, Clara said. Margaret did not look surprised. She looked at William. "You told her." "It came up," he said. "It came up," Margaret said, and the flatness of her tone said exactly what she thought of that. She looked at Clara. "The Harmon children are the youngest, 5 and 7. Their mother can barely keep up with them, let alone teach them. The Reeves family has 3. The Sutton family has 2 who've never set foot inside a school. There are 4 more beyond that, different families, different situations." She paused. "Those children aren't going to Willow Creek. The distance is too far, the weather doesn't cooperate, and some of those families have other reasons to keep clear of town." "What reasons?" Clara said. "The kind that are theirs to tell you," Margaret said, "when they trust you enough to say." Clara thought about that. "The room he mentioned," she said. "The east wing." "Needs work," Margaret said. "Floors, sound walls are good, but it hasn't been used properly in 6 years and it shows. We'd need 2 weeks, maybe 3, with everyone working." "Everyone," Clara said. "The hands know how to work with wood," Margaret said. "Tom Reeves, father of 3 of those children, he's a fine carpenter when you give him a project. He'd do it for the chance his kids get taught." Clara looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at William. "You've been planning this for a while," she said. Not accusing. Arriving. "Planning is a generous word," he said. "I had thoughts." "Since November," she said. He didn't flinch from it. "Since about the 3rd week of October, if I'm being precise." "You're always being precise," she said. "Not always," he said. "Sometimes I tell people I need fence wire from a place that doesn't sell fence wire." Margaret looked between them. "Do I want to know?" she said. "Probably not," William said. "Fine." Margaret stood and took the plates and went to the stove and came back with more coffee that nobody had asked for and everybody wanted. "You'll want to see the room before you decide anything," she said to Clara. "Morning light is different from afternoon light, and you'll want to know what you're working with." "Tomorrow," Clara said. "Tomorrow." Margaret agreed. She was shown to a guest room that was clean and warm and had a quilt on the bed that Margaret had made herself, which Clara could tell by the particular precision of the stitching, and she lay in it that night and looked at the ceiling of the Carter Ranch and listened to the sounds of a working household settling into its evening, a door closing somewhere, a log shifting in a distant fireplace. The wind outside that was familiar now, old acquaintance after 4 days on this road. She was not afraid. That was the thing she noticed most. After 6 months of fear in various forms, fear of the rumors spreading, fear of losing the school, fear of walking into town and seeing what she'd see in people's faces, fear of the 40 miles, fear of what came after the 40 miles, she lay in this room in this house, and she was not afraid. She wasn't certain either. She had things to work out and decisions to make, and a territorial school board to deal with, and a community to rebuild, and all of that was real, and none of it was simple. But the fear had gone out of it. She thought that was probably significant. She slept without dreaming. Morning came, and Margaret showed her the room. It was the east wing, just as William had said, a long rectangular space that had probably been used as a second parlor at some point. South-facing windows on 2 walls, pine floors that were dusty, but unwarped, a door that opened onto a small covered porch. The ceiling was low, but not oppressively so. The light, even on a February morning, came in at an angle that was generous with the space. Clara walked the length of it twice. She stood in the center of it and turned slowly. She thought about 23 chairs. She thought about chalk and the smell of chalk. She thought about Samuel in Missouri, reading the newspaper at 16 and knowing when the world was lying to him. She thought about the look on Daniel Aldrich's face when he'd recited back to her the things she'd taught him about rivers. "It needs a proper stove," she said. "Tom Reeves can fit one," Margaret said, "and shelving along the north wall for books. If I write to the territorial board in Helena, I can get a basic supply allocation. It won't be much, but it'll be a start." "All right. And I'll need a desk. Not too big. I work better when I'm not barricaded behind furniture." "I can describe that to Tom." Clara turned and looked at her. "You know this was already decided," she said. Margaret did not pretend to misunderstand. "I had a feeling," she said. "Before or after you saw me?" "Before I saw you," Margaret said. "When William came back from watching you walk past his fence line and spent 20 minutes standing at the kitchen window not drinking his coffee." Clara stared at her. "He spent 20 minutes. Standing at the window," Margaret confirmed. "Coffee going cold in his hand. Then he put it down and went to saddle up and didn't say a single word about where he was going." She paused. "He didn't have to." Clara absorbed that. 20 minutes, she said. "At least," Margaret said. "I stopped watching him after 15. Clara turned back to the room and looked at the south-facing windows and the morning light coming through them, and the pine floors that needed sweeping, and the walls that would hold shelves, and the door that opened onto a porch where children could sit in warmer months and read aloud, and she felt something take shape inside her that was not quite the same as what she'd felt the first morning she walked into the Willow Creek schoolhouse, because she was not the same woman she'd been in September. But it rhymed with that feeling. It was made of the same material. "We'll start on Monday," she said. "I'll tell Tom," Margaret said. She went to find William. How was in the stable, which was where men in her experience went when they were waiting for something and couldn't pace in the house without being obvious about it. He was doing something with a piece of harness that probably needed doing, and also probably could have waited, and he looked up when she came in with the expression of a man who was not going to ask first. "Monday," she said. "Tom Reeves starts on the room Monday. I'll write to the school board in Helena this week. I'll need to speak to the families, the Harmon family, the Reeves, the Suttons, all of them. Before I set any dates for opening, I want to meet the children before they meet me as their teacher." William set down the harness. "That sounds right," he said. "I'm going to be direct with you about something," she said. "Please," he said. "This is my school," she said. "Not yours, not the ranch's. Mine. I make the decisions about curriculum and schedule, and how I handle the children and their families. I answer to the territorial board, and to the parents, and to no one else in those matters." "Understood completely," he said. "And I'm not—" She stopped, collected herself. "The other thing. What's between us? That moves at my pace, not faster." He looked at her with an expression that was entirely unguarded. "Clara," he said, "I have been patient about you since October. I have a demonstrated capacity for patience." "October," she said. "You said November before." "I lied," he said. "It was October, the week you gave your own lunch to the Hanson children and told them you weren't hungry when you were clearly hungry. I watched you do that from the road and I thought—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "What did you think?" He picked up the harness again, looked at it, put it down. "I thought I was in considerable trouble," he said. Clara looked at him in the half-dark of the stable on a February morning, with the ranch quiet around them, and the east wing room, with its south-facing windows, waiting to become something. And she thought about rivers, and the paths they carved, and the difference between going nowhere and going somewhere with intention. "William," she said. "Yes. I'm going to need you to be honest with me," she said. "Not comfortable, honest. The way you have been on this road. Because I have had enough comfortable dishonesty to last the rest of my life, and I don't have room for any more of it. I can do that, he said. And when I'm wrong about something, I'll tell you, he said. Carefully, but I'll tell you. Carefully is fine, she said. Silence isn't. Agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. October, she said. October, he confirmed. You watched me give away my lunch. I did. And you thought you were in trouble. Considerable trouble, he said. Yes. She breathed in slowly. All right, she said. All right, he said. She turned to go and then stopped because something had been sitting at the back of her mind since the trading post, and she had been moving too fast to let it settle. Henry Wallace, she said without turning. He'll stay quiet. But his wife won't be easy. Ruth Wallace is not a woman who accepts having been wrong. No, William said. She's not. She'll find another way to make things difficult. Not for me necessarily. For the families who send their children here. For the Reeves family if Tom does this work. She'll try, William said. Can you handle that? She said. Not fight it for me, but stand beside it, the way you did at the trading post. Let me manage it and be there if the weight gets too heavy. She heard him move, heard him come across the stable floor, felt him stop behind her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold air. Clara, he said very quietly, I got on a horse for you in a February dawn. I walked 40 miles. I let you face Henry Wallace with your own words and your own feet, and I stood exactly where I needed to be. A pause. I know how to be beside someone. I've just been waiting for someone worth being beside. She did not turn around. She could not turn around right now because if she did, she was going to do something precipitous, and she had a rule about one thing at a time. Go eat breakfast, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said. She heard him leave. She stood in the stable for a moment longer, breathing steadying. Then she went to write the letter to the Helena School Board. 2 weeks passed. They were the two most startling weeks of Clara's adult life, not because of any single dramatic event, but because of the accumulation of ordinary ones, each of which was unexpected in a different way. Tom Reeves was, as Margaret had said, a fine carpenter. He came on Monday with his eldest son and 2 of the ranch hands, and they worked with a focused cooperative energy that Clara hadn't witnessed since her Missouri school's barn raising 3 years ago. He asked her questions about the shelving, how high, what spacing, whether she wanted a lip to keep books from sliding in rough weather. And he listened to her answers and built exactly what she described, which was a more revolutionary experience than it should have been. His 3 children came with him on Wednesday, ostensibly to hand tools, but actually, as was transparent to everyone, including Tom himself, to look at the woman who was going to be their teacher. They were 7, 9, and 12, and their names were Alice, Joseph, and Ruth, having been named for her grandmother before the grandmother's current namesake had turned the name sour in this particular county, which Margaret said with a dry precision that made Clara press her lips together very hard. Joseph, the 9-year-old, found a piece of chalk that Clara had left on the windowsill and wrote his own name on the section of wall that was not yet painted, and then looked at her with the expression of a child who has done something irrevocable and is attempting to determine the consequences. Clara looked at the name on the wall. She looked at him. "Can you write anything else?" she said. He thought very hard. Then he wrote slowly and carefully, "Dog." "Good," Clara said. "What else?" By the end of the afternoon, Joseph Reeves had written 11 words on the unpainted section of wall, and his father had stopped pretending to work on the shelving in order to watch, and neither Clara nor Tom acknowledged this directly. The Harmon children's mother arrived on the Friday of the first week with the stated purpose of asking about the school schedule and the unstated purpose of deciding whether she trusted Clara. She was a small, careful woman named June, who asked precise questions and received precise answers, and at the end of their conversation, she stood up and said, "Charlotte, she's the 7-year-old. She's been trying to teach herself her letters from the Bible. She keeps telling me the letters are pictures of sounds, and she wants to know all the sounds." She paused. "I think she's going to learn faster than I can imagine." "They usually do," Clara said, "when they're ready like that." June Harmon nodded once the nod of a woman who has completed an assessment and is satisfied with the result. Monday, she said. After the chores. After the chores, Clara agreed. On the Saturday of the first week, a letter arrived from the Territorial School Board in Helena. It was cautiously worded in the way of governmental correspondence, which acknowledged the unusual nature of the situation, while noting that the board was not unsympathetic to the educational needs of children in outlying ranch communities. It offered a provisional allocation of basic supplies, pending an inspection visit in the spring. It was signed by a deputy superintendent whose handwriting suggested he was either elderly or very cold when he wrote it. Clara read it twice and decided it was the best she was going to get from Helena until she could show them results. She wrote back the same day. On the Tuesday of the second week, William came to find her in the East Wing room, where she was arranging the books that had arrived from her storage in Willow Creek. She'd sent word through Margaret, and the landlord's wife had boxed them up and sent them out without being asked to, which was a small kindness she filed away carefully. "Someone's here to see you," he said, from Willow Creek. Her hand stilled on the books. "Who?" she said. "Berta Hansen," he said. Clara set the book down. She went out. Berta was standing in the yard, which was where she'd apparently asked to wait rather than coming inside, which told Clara something about the weight Berta was carrying. She was wearing her good coat, which also told Clara something. She had the look of a woman who has rehearsed something and is now uncertain whether the rehearsed version is going to hold. "Berta," Clara said. "Miss Whitmore." Berta's chin came up. "I won't take much of your time." "Take what you need," Clara said. Berta pressed her lips together. Then she said, "My children want to come back to you. Not to the Willow Creek school, they know you're not there anymore. Here, if you'll have them." Clara was quiet. "I know I don't deserve to ask that," Berta said. "After what I did, pulling them out, I know I don't have the right." "You were protecting them," Clara said, "in the only way you could see at the time." "It wasn't right," Berta said. "I knew it wasn't right while I was doing it, and I did it anyway because I was afraid of Henry Wallace, and afraid of what people would say, and afraid of I was just afraid." She stopped. Her jaw was working. "My Sarah hasn't been right since. She sits at home and she cries and she tells me she wants to learn things, and I don't know how to teach her the way you do. I can't—" She stopped again. "Berta," Clara said. "I'm sorry," Berta said. "I know it doesn't." "I know you are," Clara said. "Will you take them?" Clara looked at this woman who had tried to do right and hadn't managed it, and was standing in someone else's yard in her good coat, because she loved her children enough to face the person she'd failed. She thought about what courage actually looked like, which was not always the dramatic kind. Sometimes it was this: showing up and saying I was wrong and meaning it with your whole body. "Yes," Clara said. "I'll take them." Berta exhaled. Her whole frame released something she'd been holding. "Thank you," she whispered. "There are conditions," Clara said. "Not punishments, just how things work here. The children come ready to learn. They come having eaten something even if it's small. If they're sick or the weather's too bad, send word and we'll work something out. And Berta." She waited until the woman looked at her fully. "If you hear something about me again, a rumor, a story, anything, you come to me first. You ask me to my face. Do you understand?" "Yes," Berta said. "I do." Good. She watched Berta go. She stood in the yard for a moment and let the cold air do what cold air does, which is strip everything down to what's actually there. She thought about all of it, the months in Willow Creek and the road and the 40 miles and the trading post and Henry Wallace and the East Wing room and Tom Reeves's son writing 11 words on an unpainted wall. And she thought that the shape of her life, which had looked like wreckage 3 weeks ago, had taken a form she hadn't been able to imagine. Not an easier form, not a safer one, but truer, more like herself. She heard William behind her and didn't turn. "The Hansen children," she said. "I heard," he said. He'd been near the door. She'd known. "That's 12 children," she said. "I'm going to need more shelving." "I'll tell Tom," he said. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "William," she said. "Yes." She turned. I was standing in the yard behind her exactly where he'd been standing since she turned around on a road and found him there, steady present, not between her and what she needed to face, but never more than one step away. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right," he said. "I thought when I was packing that suitcase," she said, "that the worst thing that happened to me in Willow Creek was the rumors." She paused. But it wasn't. The worst thing was that it made me stop believing anyone could see me clearly. That I let myself become invisible to myself because so many people looked at me and saw nothing worth keeping. She held his gaze. "You changed that. Not by rescuing me, by looking." His expression was completely open. "Clara," he said. "I'm not finished," she said. He waited. "I'm staying," she said. "Not because I have nowhere else to go. Not because you gave me a room and a school and a reason. Because I looked at this place and I looked at you and I looked at myself in both of those mirrors and I recognized something I thought I'd lost." She breathed. "I'm not saying that lightly. I don't say things lightly." "I know," he said. "And I'm not promising you everything on a Tuesday morning in February," she said. "But I'm here, and I intend to stay here. And if that means something to you, it means everything to me," he said, quiet and flat and completely true. She looked at him. The yard was cold. The East Wing room was behind them, with its south-facing light and its pine floors and Tom Reeves's careful shelving. 12 children were coming. The spring was somewhere on the other side of this winter green beyond imagination. "All right then," she said. "All right," he said. She turned and went back inside to arrange her books, and she heard him behind her, and the ranch settled around them both, like something that had always known they were coming. Spring came to the Carter Ranch, the way William had described it, without apology and without warning, arriving one morning, as if it had always been inevitable, and the winter had simply been a long argument it had already won. Clara felt it before she saw evidence of it. She woke one Tuesday in late March, and something in the quality of the air through the window gap had changed, and she lay still for a moment, identifying it, and then she got up and went to start the school day with more energy than she'd had in weeks. 12 children came through the door of the East Wing room that morning. 13 if you counted Charlotte Harmon arriving 7 minutes early, which Clara did count, and which she took as a sign that the day was going to go well. It did. Charlotte Harmon was exactly what her mother had promised a child who understood instinctively that letters were pictures of sounds, who attacked reading the way some children attacked arithmetic, with the concentrated fury of someone for whom it was not abstract but urgent. She had been teaching herself from the Bible all winter and had arrived at the Carter Ranch schoolroom with a foundation that was uneven in the charming way of self-taught foundations, full of unexpected gaps and unexpected strengths, and Clara worked with it the way a good carpenter worked with interesting wood, not against the grain, but with it. Joseph Reeves had expanded considerably beyond 11 words. Alice, his 7-year-old sister, had surpassed him. Tom Reeves noticed this on the morning he came to fix a hinge on the door and stayed 40 minutes longer than the hinge required. Watching his daughter read aloud from the primer, with a fluency that had not existed 3 weeks prior. He didn't say anything when he left, but he came back the following day with 2 additional boards of shelving that nobody had asked for, cut and finished and ready to hang, and he leaned them against the wall and said, "Thought you might need more room." And Clara said, "Thank you, Tom." And neither of them mentioned his daughter, or the 40 minutes, or the particular expression on his face when she'd read without stopping. They didn't need to. The school had its own momentum now, the kind that builds when children start talking to each other about what they've learned, and the talking becomes its own form of learning, and the parents start noticing changes at the supper table. A child who asks a question differently, who reads a word off a label, who corrects a number in the household accounts with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. June Harmon told Clara one afternoon that Charlotte had started reading to her younger brother at bedtime. "Reading to him," June said, like she still wasn't entirely sure it was real. "She picks the books herself," Clara said. "She does. She has opinions about which ones are worth his time." June shook her head slowly. "She's 7 years old, and she has opinions about literature." "She had them before," Clara said. "She just didn't have words to dress them in yet. June looked at her with the expression of a woman reconsidering several things simultaneously. "How do you do that?" she said. "See what's in them before it's visible." "I had a teacher once who did it for me," Clara said. "I'm just paying it forward." Margaret, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, with the subtlety of someone who had long since stopped pretending she didn't listen, said, "That's the job, isn't it? Passing something on that someone passed to you." "That's the whole job," Clara said. Margaret nodded once and went back to her kitchen. It was during the third week of April that Ruth Wallace came to the ranch. Clara was in the schoolroom when she heard the horse in the yard. She heard William's voice, and then a woman's voice that she recognized with a particular quality of alertness, not fear, but a tightening attention, the way the body prepares itself when something that once had power over it comes back into range. She kept teaching. Joseph Reeves was working through a long division problem at the board and needed her full attention, which she gave him, while some part of her tracked the voices in the yard and assessed their temperature. William's was level and unhurried. Ruth Wallace's was controlled. Not friendly, but controlled, which was better than Clara had expected. She finished the lesson. She said, "Alice, will you lead the reading for the next 15 minutes? The primer, chapter 4. I want everyone to have a turn." Alice, who was 8 years old and had discovered very recently that she liked being in charge of things, said, "Yes, Miss Whitmore," with a composure that made Joseph roll his eyes and made Clara press her lips together to keep the smile professional. She went out. Ruth Wallace was standing in the yard with William wearing a coat that cost more than most of the families on this range earned in a month. She looked older than Clara remembered, or maybe just smaller the way people sometimes looked when you saw them outside the context that had made them seem large. "Miss Whitmore," Ruth said. "Mrs. Wallace," Clara said. They looked at each other. The whole yard was quiet. William stood slightly to Clara's left in the place he'd stood at the trading post, and she felt him there without looking. "I'll be direct," Ruth said. "It's the only way I know." "I appreciate that," Clara said, meaning it. "My husband made a contribution to the Willow Creek School," Ruth said. "You know about that." "I do." "That was his decision, not mine." She paused. "I would have made a different one." Clara said nothing. Waited. "I would have made it public," Ruth said. "A public contribution in your name, with a public acknowledgement that the council's action against you was wrong from the beginning." Her jaw was tight. Henry thought it was better to do it quietly. He was wrong about that too. Clara stared at her. This was not what she'd been prepared for. "Mrs. Wallace," she said carefully. "I am not a woman who apologizes easily," Ruth said. "I want you to know that so you understand the weight of what I'm about to say." She squared her shoulders in a way that looked like it cost her something. "I made your life difficult from the moment you arrived. Not because you'd done anything wrong, because you were different, and I was stupid enough to let different look like a threat." Her voice didn't waver, but her hands, Clara noticed, were not entirely still. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I mean that without qualification." The schoolroom behind Clara was quiet, except for the sound of Alice reading aloud, her small, clear voice carrying the words of Chapter 4 into the April morning air. Clara thought about September. She thought about the look in Ruth Wallace's eyes the first time they met, the assessment and the dismissal. The small cruelties that had been the foundation everything else was built on. She thought about standing in an empty schoolroom with 23 chairs and understanding that nobody was coming. She thought about the road, the 40 miles, the person she'd been at the start of it, and the person she was here. "I believe you," Clara said. Ruth blinked, like she'd been braced for something harder. "That's all," she said. "What else would you like?" Clara said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to send my niece to your school," she said. "She's 8. She lives on the Callahan property 4 miles north. She hasn't been in a classroom in 2 years because the family's circumstances changed." She met Clara's eyes. "She deserves better than what she's getting, and I'd like her to have it." Clara looked at her. She thought about what Margaret had said, that the job was passing something on that someone had passed to you. She thought about the shape of grace, which was not the same as forgetting and was not the same as pretending, but was the decision to let a thing be finished so that something else could begin. "What's her name?" Clara said. Lily, Ruth said. Lily Callahan, she's... Something moved in Ruth's face. Something that was surprisingly close to love. She's a bright girl. Too bright for her circumstances. Monday, Clara said. Bring her Monday. We start at 8, but if she needs longer to get here, we can be flexible the first week while she adjusts. Ruth Wallace stood in the yard of the Carter Ranch and absorbed this. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Clara said. Lily earns her own place here, same as everyone else. Ruth nodded. Then she looked at William, and something passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but the acknowledgement between two people who have lived in the same community long enough to know each other's weights. Carter, she said. Ruth, he said. She left. Clara stood in the yard watching her go. William came to stand beside her. Well, he said. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything. You had a tone. I didn't have a tone. You had a tone, William. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was going to say that was one of the more remarkable things I've watched you do in a long list of remarkable things. She looked at the road Ruth Wallace had taken. She meant it, Clara said. I know. That was hard for her, saying it like that directly without softening it. It was, he agreed. I'm not forgiving Henry Wallace, she said. I want to be clear about that. Clear as glass, he said. But Ruth... She stopped. Ruth is a woman who got things wrong and came to say so. That's not nothing. No, William said. It's not. She turned and went back inside. Alice was still reading. She hadn't stopped, and she'd kept everyone with her, and Joseph had corrected his division problem in the margin of his slate while she wasn't looking. Clara took her place at the front of the room, and the rhythm of the morning resumed. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The territorial inspector arrived on a Thursday in early May. His name was Mr. Croft, and he was not elderly, despite what his handwriting had implied. He was perhaps 45, brisk and methodical, with the air of a man who had visited many frontier schoolrooms and expected to find most of them deficient in one way or another. He arrived at 8 in the morning unannounced, which was apparently his method. Clara was mid-lesson when the door opened. She had 14 children in the room by this point. Lily Callahan had been followed 3 weeks later by her younger brother on the strength of whatever Lily had reported at home, which Clara had not asked about and did not need to. She had adapted the curriculum to accommodate the range of ages and abilities without reducing the level of challenge for any of them. And on the morning Croft arrived, she happened to be doing something that she would not have been able to plan better if she'd had advance notice. She was having the 3 oldest children teach the 3 youngest ones. It was an experiment she'd started in the second week, not because she'd run out of ideas, but because she'd noticed that the older children retained things better when they had to explain them, and the younger ones relaxed when they were being taught by someone who was not an authority figure, and the combination of those two effects produced results that were by any measure remarkable. Croft stood in the doorway for 4 minutes without announcing himself. Nobody noticed him. They were too busy. When he finally said, Miss Whitmore, the room looked up, and Clara turned from the board and said, Mr. Croft, come in, we're just finishing. He came in. He stayed 2 hours. He asked questions. Not challenging ones, genuine ones. The questions of a man who had expected deficiency and found something else and was recalibrating. He asked how she'd organized the curriculum across age groups. She told him. He asked how she managed attendance given the distances involved. She told him. He asked whether the parents were engaged. She introduced him to Tom Reeves, who had come that morning to fix a loose board in the porch and was still there because Tom had lately developed a habit of finding small repairs that needed doing on school mornings. He introduced himself to Tom. Tom said, My son was writing 11 words when she started. He's writing sentences now, complete ones with punctuation. He said it the way a man states a fact that he finds slightly miraculous. She did that in 3 months. Croft wrote something in his ledger. Before he left, he shook Clara's hand and said that the provisional allocation would become a full one for the following academic year, and that he would be recommending the Carter Ranch School. He said it that way. Carter Ranch School, which was the first time Clara had heard it named to the board as a model for outlying community education. A model, Clara said. You've solved a problem we've been trying to solve for 15 years, he said. How to reach the children who can't reach us. He closed his ledger. Don't change what you're doing. He left. William, who had been in the yard, came in. Well, he said. Full allocation, she said. And a recommendation. He was quiet for a moment. Congratulations, he said. Thank you, she said. She sat down at her desk and looked at the room around her, the shelving Tom had built, and the books on them, and the boards on the wall with the children's work pinned to it, and the south-facing light coming in the windows, at the angle she'd evaluated that first February morning, and she felt something settle in her that had been in motion for a very long time. That evening after the children had gone, and Margaret had produced the spring soup she'd been promising since February. The three of them sat at the kitchen table, and Margaret poured something that was not coffee into 3 glasses and held hers up. To the Carter Ranch School, she said. Margaret, William said. I'm toasting, Margaret said. Don't interrupt a toast. He didn't. They drank. After. Margaret went to bed. Clara and William sat at the table with the remains of the evening between them and the house, quiet around them, and the spring night outside the window, doing whatever spring nights did when no one was watching. I need to tell you something, William said. She looked at him. I spoke to Reverend Ames last week, he said. Her pulse did something. About, she said, keeping her voice level. About a number of things, he said. He asked how you were. I told him you were building something remarkable. He agreed. He paused. He also asked whether I had intentions. Clara was very still. What did you tell him? She said. I told him yes, William said, and that the matter of timing was not mine to determine. She looked at her glass. Intentions is a very formal word, she said. Reverend Ames is a very formal man. What would you call it if not intentions? Howe was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was in the voice he used when he was saying something he'd been holding carefully and was now setting down in front of her, the way you set down something you don't want to break. I would call it this, he said. I would call it that I have been certain about you since October, and I have been patient through February and March and April, and I would be patient through another 6 months or 6 years if that's what you needed. But Clara, he stopped. I want to build this with you. All of it. Not just the school, not just the ranch. I want to be the person beside you when things go wrong, and when they go right, and when they're ordinary, and when they're not. He met her eyes. I'm asking you plainly if that's something you want too. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, something moved in the yard. William's horse shifting the familiar sound of it, and the spring night breathed around the house. Clara thought about the woman who had packed a suitcase in the dark, who had walked out of Willow Creek with $3.40 and nowhere particular to be, and the conviction that her life had run out of road. She thought about 40 miles in a storm, and 2 riders on an empty road, and Henry Wallace on a porch, and Berta Hansen in her good coat, and Ruth Wallace in the yard, and Charlotte Harmon reading aloud, and Joseph Reeves and 11 words becoming sentences. She thought about what she'd said to William in this house 2 months ago. I'm here, and I intend to stay here. She thought about rivers and the paths they carved. You said you had a demonstrated capacity for patience, she said. I do, he said. Good, she said. Because I'm going to say yes, and then I'm going to tell you that I want to do this properly, not because I care what Willow Creek thinks, but because I want it to mean exactly what it means, and that takes time, and you're going to have to be patient about that too. He was completely still. Yes, he said. Yes, she said. He breathed out slowly. All right, he said. All right, she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she let him, and his hand was warm and certain and completely real, and she looked at it for a moment and thought that this solid, specific, unperformed thing was what she had not known she was walking toward when she walked away from Willow Creek in February. I want a proper ceremony, she said. Small, just the people who mean something. Whatever you want, he said. Margaret has to be there. She'd never forgive either of us if she wasn't. Tom Reeves and his family. Of course. And the Harmon children. Charlotte will want to attend something meaningful. She'll write about it later. You think she'll write about it? That girl writes about everything, Clara said. She wrote about the way the light comes through the classroom window last week. I have it on my desk. William looked at her with the expression that was his version of complete happiness, which was not large or performed, but was the deepest and most reliable thing she'd seen in anyone's face in a long time. All right, he said again, and soft. She turned her hand over under his and held it. Months later, in the fullness of summer, when the Montana hills were the green that William had described, and the creek was up, and the schoolroom was closed for the warm season, but would open again in September with an enrollment of 18, because word had traveled. The way word traveled in ranch country, which was thoroughly and fast. Clara stood with William on the rise behind the ranch house in the late afternoon, and looked at the land below them. She was Mrs. Clara Carter, now had been for 6 weeks married on a Saturday morning in May, with Margaret weeping into her good handkerchief and trying to pretend she wasn't, and Tom Reeves standing straight and careful in his best shirt, and Charlotte Harmon watching everything with the focused attention of someone who was definitely going to write about this later. Reverend Ames had performed the ceremony. He'd been, as predicted, very formal. Clara had not minded. She thought about September, and the stagecoach arriving in Willow Creek, and the school board chairman with his formal handshake. She thought about all the versions of this life she might have lived, the one that stayed in Missouri, the one that got on the train at Crestfall, the one that let the 40 miles break her instead of clarify her. She thought about the road. William's hand found hers without either of them looking. "Do you know what Charlotte told me yesterday?" Clara said. "What did she say?" "She said she wants to be a teacher when she grows up." Clara paused. "She said she wants to find the children nobody else is looking for." William was quiet for a moment. "She learned that from someone," he said. "She learned it from herself," Clara said. "I just gave her the language for it." He looked at her. "Is that what you do?" he said. "Give people language for what's already in them." She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about things that mattered. "I think so," she said. "I think most people already know what they are. They just need someone to say it back to them in a way they can believe." She looked at the land below. "You did that for me, on that road. You didn't need me to—" "I know I didn't need it," she said. "That's not the point. The point is that you chose to. You got on a horse at dawn because you couldn't stay still in good conscience, and you walked 40 miles, and you told me the truth every single time I asked, and that—" She stopped. Started again. "That's not a small thing. Don't ever let anyone tell you it was a small thing." William held her hand in the summer evening on the hill above the ranch and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "You walked into a room full of empty chairs and you didn't break." "Almost," she said. "Almost is not the same," he said. "You didn't." She thought about 23 empty chairs. She thought about 18 children who were coming back in September. She thought about Charlotte Harmon reading aloud while Mr. Croft stood in the doorway, recalibrating everything he'd expected to find, and Joseph Reeves's 11 words becoming sentences, and Lily Callahan sitting in the back corner with her younger brother's hand in hers on his first day, because she'd told him it was going to be good, and she needed him to believe her. She thought about the woman who had walked out of Willow Creek alone on a February morning believing her story was ending. She had been so completely wrong. "No," she said. "I didn't break." She looked at the land they had built together, the school and the ranch, and the life assembled piece by piece from the materials of a February morning and 40 miles of cold road, and every true thing said between two people who had decided that honesty was worth more than comfort. "I didn't break," she said again, and this time it was not a memory. It was a fact settled and final belonging to the woman she was now, and the life she had built with her own hands and her own courage, and the man beside her who had seen her clearly from the very beginning. She had walked out of Willow Creek looking for somewhere to go. She had found something greater. The knowledge that a woman who knew her own worth could not be made homeless by people who refused to see it because she carried her home inside her, And when the right place appeared, she recognized it, and she stayed. And no one, not rumor, not cruelty, not fear, not the long cold miles of a Montana winter, would ever